shown that we spend more money per capita for municipal services in other regions. $600 more than Indianapolis, $700 more per person than Louisville, and a lot of that goes towards administration. And this study is an example of another place that money's going.
All right, let's talk about you. You researched the number of aldermen here in the region.
Sure. So we have 684 total elected municipal officials, 571 aldermen, 91 mayors, 87 city managers, and over 80 city halls.
And this is just in St. Louis County?
Yep, St. Louis County and St. Louis City, but there's one for each in the city.
Okay, so so there's one mayor in the city of St. Louis.
Sure.
There's one group of aldermen. So minus all of these numbers by one, really, when you're talking about it.
There's 28 aldermen in the city, and I think that's getting cut in half actually.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So say those numbers again.
684 elected officials in municipalities, 571 aldermen, 91 mayors, and 87 city managers.
There are
91 mayors?
91 mayors. You also have numbers here that more than half of the aldermen represent...
Less than 1,000 people.
Half of the aldermen of that 571 represent less than 1,000 people.
289.
And then you also broke it down in population of less than 500.
Yes, so that's about a third of the aldermen in the region serve less than 500 constituents.
So a third of the elected aldermen in the county represent less than 500 residents in their town.
That is correct. And actually, in any given month, there's 131 city council meetings in the region, which is hard for even the media to cover.
Okay, what about salaries? Let's get into salaries.
Sure. So what we found is, in a lot of the governments, the city manager, city administrator is the top paid employee because usually a lot of these elected officials are part-time. So they rely on full-time city managers, clerk, administrators, and we spend about $6 million on those positions in the 90 municipalities.
You also found out that many of them get paid more than Mayor Slay.
Yeah, there's a dozen or so, actually probably closer to 20 that get paid more than the county executive, Steve Stanger, or Mayor Francis Slay.
So there
any
are...
of those and they have to be any of those like with residents of less than 1,000 that get paid more than that?
They're usually a little bit more than that, but there's some around 4,000 or 5,000.
So there are city managers that in this county that make more than Stanger and Mayor Slay.
Correct.
Okay, let's go to city attorneys because this is really interesting as well. Talk about the city attorneys and the actual attorneys and the law firms that represent these cities.
Right. So there's an influential group of attorneys in the region that really counsel all of these part-time officials, the administrators, on a lot of the important decisions. And what we found is there's one core group that represents over half of the cities. There's 14 mayors in total that represent, I believe it's 46 municipalities. So one of the arguments for...
So there are 14 lawyers
right.
That represent, what did you say, 27 municipalities?
No, 14 that represent 47 municipalities.
47. So 14 attorneys represent almost 50 cities in the county.
Yeah, and there's one single firm of 9 attorneys that represents 27 of the cities. So one of the arguments for a lot of local government is you get the variations you want and all these things, but we have a core group of people that is really just filling these positions over and over again, and you're getting a lot of the same, quote, expertise that you would get if you had less.
But these city attorneys are only city attorneys for those cities.
They're city attorneys, and some of them are also prosecutors in those cities. There's one city attorney for 3 municipalities. It's also a mayor in a 4th. There's a city attorney who's a councilman in another municipality, a judge in another municipality, and a prosecutor in another municipality.
Dave Leitbolt's with Better Together. There's a gentleman who came out who is the author of a report from Cities Strong, which these cities are sort of fighting back against Better Together.
Sure.
Because they're upset that you guys, according to this report, written by Mark Tranell, who is the UMSL Public Policy Research Center, director of that, he said that the research that you are presenting in these reports uncovered significant gaps and discrepancies in side-by-side comparisons with other cities.
Right. So I also think it's important to note that Mark is the paid city collector for Bell Fountain Neighbors, which is a municipality in the county. So
Wait a minute. The guy who wrote this report for City Strong works for one of these cities?
Sure. So you have the municipal league working with former municipal officials to pay for a study by a current municipal official with taxpayer dollars.
So he's not.
He's not an outside.
He's not outsider, and he's not independent. He's actually connected to this whole thing.
Sure. And, has worked with this group for years, and we met with him to go over our findings and our reasoning, because our study was meant as a comparison of similar services. And what their report did was just try and drive up the cost of Indianapolis, because they know the cost of St. Louis is high.
Right.
So they tried to add things like stadiums, even though we took them out for St. Louis. They tried to add costs for public health, even though in Indianapolis they operate long-term care facilities and a hospital. So it's just not apples to apples.
But this guy, director of the UMSL Public Policy Research Center, is critical of you and the author of this City Strong's report, and yet is an employee of one of these cities.
Correct.
So he has a financial gain to keep these cities going, because he is, as you say, what is he in one of these cities? He's
the city collector, so he collects the revenue.
He collects
for
the
Bell Fountain
revenue
Neighbors.
for one of these cities, in which he is then critical of you. That's interesting. So the man clearly has a conflict of interest. Does he disclose that conflict of interest when he talks?
No. It's presented as a academic exercise.
Right.
But for us, it's important, because to present it that way
Right.
is, I think, a little dishonest in terms of presenting that data, and especially when we took the time to meet with them and explain our methodology and our reasoning.
I would think UMSL would like to know that the director of their Public Policy Research Center has a conflict of interest, and he's not disclosing it. That's not very academic of him. Where do we go from here, David Leipoltz? Where can people read this study?
So you can go to bettertogetherstl.com, and all of our studies and data is up there. We'll have one more small study on general administration before we move on to what we think of as a wrap-up report of all of our reports.
Right. And this report was released, just an hour or so ago? Or
Yeah, just this morning.
Just this morning. So reaction has yet to, clearly there'll be quite a bit of reaction to this, because these are some unbelievable numbers.
We hope that it spurs an important conversation, because, we've seen cities using courts to get much-needed revenue, and when you have this many elected officials, managers, attorneys involved, that just is a cost that's there. There's no best practices for getting rid of that. If you want to have 90 mayors, you pay for that.
571 aldermen, more than half represent populations of less than 1,000, and over a third represent populations of less than 500.
It's mind-boggling to me that some of these mayors make more than Mayor Slay or the county executive.
Well, and they also all play a role in zoning and policing and issues. This isn't Mayberry or some small town.
These are 21st century issues.
Right, and we travel through all these communities each and every day. So to act as if they're in silos is just not how the world works.
David Leipoltz, always a pleasure. Thanks for coming in.
All right, thank you.
726, Big 550, KTRS. Bowen Dental Care. Anybody have an emergency dentist they need to get to? Bowen Dental Care will help you out as well. BOA